Great. Welcome, everybody. I see everybody starting to join us, and welcome to a Good Governance Academy webinar. As those who perhaps are not familiar with the Good Governance Academy webinars, we are very interactive, and we treat this very much like a conversation or a fireside chat. So please have a look at the chat function and let us know where you're from. If you have any questions for us, it sometimes gets lost in the chat function. So please, if you can just put that in the Q&A box so that we can pick them up. And please, if you are happy with what we're saying, thumbs up, clap, give us a high five, love us, heart us. It'll be great just to get some feedback. We really love your engagement online. I'd just like to quickly play the video so that you know what we're talking about today. It's really great to invite Jay back here to a Good Governance Academy event, and we really are looking forward to hearing about the 5 superpowers, specifically in relation to the Chief Information Officer in the IT context and the relationship between the CIO and the board, which is something very close to my heart, having been a CIO for many, many years. But Vipin is here to give us a really detailed perspective of that. But without any further ado, let me hand over to you, Jay, and welcome back to a GTA event.
Thank you. You should be able to see my screen now.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Perfect. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Imagine if your board CIO conversations weren't mostly about budgets or cyber risk, but about building the future of your business. Right now, fewer than 1 in 3 reach that level, and yet CEOs consistently rank it. IT, that business alignment is a top growth driver. When boards and CIOs elevate their relationship, they don't just manage risk, they unlock extraordinary value for themselves, for the organization, and its stakeholders. That's the opportunity in front of us today. That's what we'll be discussing. I'm Jay Weiser, the Chief Catalyst and Navigator of Jay Weiser Consulting. I guide and enable boards and executive teams to become future ready, able to navigate and thrive in the face of disruption and uncertainty. I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Vipin Gupta. Vipin, if you'd introduce yourself, and I have a question for you once you do that, and that is, why is there a unique opportunity to upgrade the CIO board relationship, and why now?
Oh, thank you, Jay. Good evening and good morning to everyone. I am calling in from Dallas, Texas, in the US. It's 9 a.m. here. It's a coffee time for me. So I'm glad to join this conversation with you, Jay, always. A little bit of a background, as you asked, Jay, for me to introduce myself. As I said, I live in Dallas, Texas, with my wife. I have 2 sons, both are adults. I would call them financially independent. And I've, professionally speaking, 35 years of doing technology and leadership, largely for financial services institutions. First 15 years or so, I was in consulting business, led up to being a partner in E&Y, Ernst & Young, and later, last about 20 years or so, in various roles at CIO for various banks like National City Bank, later on KeyBank, and then most recently at Toyota and Toyota Financial Services. And we're going to talk a little bit about that story today. And for the last couple of years or so, after I have left Toyota and the corporate life, and now I'm the president of Flipped RX, a technology company where we are building a startup. It's a startup. We're building a technology solution for pharmacy benefits management industry. one of its kind, a cloud-based, very modern technology that we're trying to build to really modernize the whole industry from that perspective. So that's what I do now. And in my spare time, I'm learning to play golf, and I do play golf regularly now. The good news is people do invite me back to the golf games. That means I'm okay. I'm not embarrassing them. So that's a little bit about my life. Regarding the question, Jay, I think you asked, why do we think board and CIOs have a unique opportunity to kind of look at this relationship now? I think let's start with the most fundamental thing. All of us know this. Boards know this too, that every company is now a digital company. Every company is driven by software. This is no secret anymore. I think every board member knows this. Every board knows this. But what they may not fully grasp, and I think not everyone fully grasps, is that almost every element, every change in the organization now goes through IT in some form or fashion. And so I think knowing not only the fact that software runs our business, but knowing how that software actually and how to harness the power of software to grow the business becomes really important. At the same time, the roles of CIOs, as a lot of you must be in those roles, and like Carolyn mentioned, she was in that kind of role. You have seen that the role of a CIO today is very different from what it used to be 10 years back versus 20 years back. So today's CIO is very different. The role really expects the CIO to be not only an operator, not only managing and transformation or the projects, but also being a strategic business leader for the organization. So on one hand, the companies are becoming more digital. On the other hand, the role of CIO is becoming more and more relevant and elevated. And more importantly, if you really think about it, in any organization, CIOs are the future or the architects of the future version of the company. If there's any change that is taking place in the company, chances are it's on CIO's list because something around digital has to happen. And with that kind of a combination where boards are responsible to govern, guide, and grow the business, and here are CIOs who are actually at the center of every element of governance and growth of the business, I think that's why this relationship becomes even more important today than it ever has been. And I think it's only going to grow in importance in the future.
Thank you, Vipin. So, Vipin's been talking about the state of the board-CIO relationship. And I think it's important to note that board responsibilities have also expanded dramatically, given all the turbulence, the uncertainty, the introduction of AI, digital, tariffs, trade issues, geopolitical issues. There's a lot more the board has to pay attention to. The scope is wider, the issues are more complex. And if you ask board members, the pressure can be relentless. Second, the CIO role is shifting, as Vipin alluded to. Technology is no longer a support function. It's the core enabler of business value. Here's the challenge. Many directors bring deep legacy expertise, but the experience that once made them invaluable may not be enough for today's turbulence, and that creates blind spots. Put simply, the world has changed faster than the board-CIO relationship, and that's why new capabilities are needed on both sides of the table to move from oversight to real value creation. That's the state of the relationship. But here's the bigger question. Why does it matter so much right now? First, we talked about technology is no longer supporting the business. It is the business. And in an environment of relentless disruption, if boards and CIOs stay misaligned, we talked about blind spots, missed opportunities, and unnecessary risk. But when they align, the payoff is real. Clarity of direction, stronger foresight, better agility, and ultimately, greater stakeholder value. So Vipin, if you were advising a new board member without a tech background, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them about building the right relationship with their CIO?
Yeah, Jay, I think that's a great question. And I do talk to some of the new board members and I think one of the big pieces they have to really see, and most of the board members do, they have a really good acumen for risk, for capital allocation, for strategic outlooks. But when they talk to the CIOs, one of the pieces, the advice that I give them is to think about CIO as an enterprise business leader who's really building think about it as an enterprise machine. Everything that changes in this machine, something goes through IT and digital leaders. And so think of them as an enterprise architect of your business, not just an operator of technology. Because the future version of your business, what's going to happen next depends on the kind of digital capabilities that we are building today. And if you really think about it in an organization, very few roles really have that enterprise-wide lens in the future context. So they're truly these present futurists. They're trying to connect the future to the present. And I think that's really important. So the board members, one of the things that I always advise them is think of CIOs as your chief engineering officers. They're engineering your next version of your business, and talk to them just like you will talk to the CEO or the CFO, not like an operator of the back office function. IT used to be an operational function. It is no more. IT is core to the business growth. Now, we all know this. Board members know this. I'm not saying that they don't know. But ability to translate that understanding into the relationship with CIOs becomes really important.
Thank you. Yeah, so let's hold that thought for a minute and let's take a quick pulse check. So we're going to do the first survey. In the first survey, I want to ask everybody to think about how future ready is your board CIO relationship, given what we've shared so far. Is that relationship outdated, not caught up with the times? Is it focused primarily on today? Is it evolving, or is it now future ready? So if everyone would please cast their votes, we'll give you about a half a minute to a minute. And once we get that results, we'll start talking about that and what that tells us. You know, one of the things, Vipin, as you were talking, that was quite interesting, you know, as you talk about, you know, being an architect of the future of the business, you know, an architect, you know, working with the rest of the leadership team, the board, looking at the market, is designing that house or, you know, that company for the future. So there's a lot of inputs you have to take in. It's not just the technology piece. So now we're getting some results in, and let's see what we're looking at. So not surprisingly, it's a little under 10% that are future ready. We've got 20% that are showing outdated, about a third who are focused on today, and a little over a third evolving. You know, Vipin, is there anything that surprises you here, you know, looking at the results?
Yeah, in a way, yes and no. I would have expected a little bit more of future ready. That is a little bit of a surprise. And I think it is not only a reflection of the relationship between the board and the CIOs, but also a reflection of the maturity of the board members and the directors as well. So that's a little surprising. Again, it is also, we have a wide range of audience today. So this is really, really helpful data and the context. So that's the surprising part. But that's where I believe both the board members and the CIOs have a huge opportunity. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today. And I think CIOs can really pull the board forward to be future ready. That's how I see it. When I was I can talk about my last experience at Toyota, that's exactly what I felt. I didn't walk into the boardroom to try to preach them or teach them. I felt like it was my responsibility to define what the future is, how we're going to get that future, and how technology is really going to be the critical part of enabling that future, and then pull them forward. Not that I was not talking about the operational issues, but operational issues mattered in context of not only current, but in the context of the future that we are going. So I think this is a huge opportunity. I think in a way, this is very positive data that tells me if you are a CIO, huge opportunity to make a difference and influence. And if you're a board member, huge opportunity to learn how digital can really pull you forward and get you future ready.
Thank you. And I think it's important that, as we go through today, we know people are at different levels of maturity, different backgrounds. It doesn't matter where you're starting from, but I think the point that poll conveys is everybody, has some room for improvement. So I want to introduce a maturity model looking at the board-CIO relationship. And the model shows how that board-CIO relationship can evolve. At the bottom, we have transactional. Interactions are ad hoc. They're reactive, very often firefighting. Functional, where I suspect most organizations are at least at, there's more consistency, but it's still siloed. And there's a narrow focus on IT and not so much the integration with the business. Next is collaborative. Here, conversations broaden, strategy begins to enter the picture, but the results, are uneven. Those are the folks who are evolving. And ultimately, you want that strategic partnership where the board and the CIOs speak the same language. They share accountability and they create value together. So let me ask people to put in the chat, where would you place your last board-CIO interaction? Where would it be on the spectrum? Was it transactional? Was it functional, collaborative, or was it strategic partnership? So as we see some results come in, we're seeing transactional, functional. So we're seeing a lot of transactional and functional. It's not surprising given what people said in the polls. Functional to collaborative. So again, we're seeing that opportunity. So as we think about this a little bit more, part of moving up the chain, part of going from transactional to functional to collaborative and strategic partnership is the relationship evolves, and so does the expectations of the CIO. Because the CIO moves from being an IT operator to a business strategist to ultimately, as Vipin spoke about, the engineer of the future and an enterprise value creator. So Vipin, I have a question for you. I know you coach a lot of CIOs, you work with a lot of CIOs. What are the one or two most important changes they need to make to move up that maturity scale and ultimately become value creators?
A great question, Jay. I think CIOs, first of all, this poll, by the way, is really reflective of, again, the poll and the data around whether it's transactional versus collaborative versus strategic seems to be all related, and a reflection of where we are on the boards, not only boards, but the maturity of the CIO. For the CIOs, I think I feel big shift that needs to happen for CIOs. CIOs need to show up in the boardroom with what I call as a commercial acumen as a business leader. They are technology leaders. They are in that role because they are good at technology. They don't need to keep proving themselves around that. They absolutely need to have the confidence and the competence, and for the board to have the confidence in them But the big piece is commercial acumen. Show up as a chief engineer officer who not only understands how to engineer and design the organization and the capabilities, but how do we maximize the commercial growth out of those decisions? And I think that's really, really important, and that's reflective. The second piece is bring this kind of an enterprise lens. CIO is a kind of a unique role if you really think about it in an organization. Not only as CIOs, we are responsible for operating the machine. We are also responsible for enhancing the machine at the same time. There's a lot that is going on. There is really no other role around the C-suite table that kind of has that dual kind of mindset that is at play at all times. So what that means is they need to bring that kind of an enterprise lens. They have a really good understanding of how these broader capabilities interrelate. And that's an important aspect of decision making. Not every board member understands the entire machine in a broad. So what happens is naturally they are very transactional in nature. They're looking at one decision to be made without the full context. So CIOs need to bring the full context. So number one, commercial acumen. Number two is the full context of the enterprise. And this is really, really important. It'll make a big difference. At least it made a big difference for me. And the third piece I would say is don't show up to inform. It's not about dashboards and reports. It's really about influence. Because one of the big pieces about CIOs is that because they sit in this kind of a cross-functional nature of the enterprise, where every change and every incident kind of has an impact on their role, they become naturally the collaborators across functions. The cross-functional collaboration becomes really, really critical for their own success and the company's success. And they need to bring that cross-functional interdependencies and that to the table. So again, commercial acumen, really bringing the whole context and then bringing the cross-functional interdependencies and collaboration to the table. That's how they need to show up rather than bringing up dashboards and trying to respond to what cybersecurity issues we have. I'm not saying that should not be done. That should be done. That's table stakes. But that won't lead you from transaction to strategic partnership. So we are responsible. I feel as a CIO, I felt responsible. If my board was transactional, I felt like I am not bringing the entire context to them. And once you start doing that, the relationship changes.
I think one of the things, you talked about was that, enterprise view, that business acumen, in that future focus. When you look at dashboards, you look at measures, that's looking backwards. And I think an important part of the discussion is looking forward. Now, I was going to do a survey around the different transactional, functional, collaborative, strategic partnership, but I think we got that through the chat. So I want to jump ahead. And, part of what we've been talking about is about future readiness. And the question is, what does that mean? What does future readiness mean? And the first thing, it's not about predicting the future. What we're talking about is preparing for it. The definition I found that I find most fitting is simple. It's the capacity of leaders, teams, and boards to consistently anticipate, adapt, and act amid disruption and uncertainty. And here's the key piece: before circumstances force a response. It's about being proactive, because if you're forced to respond, you're already too late. It means you didn't anticipate. Maybe you didn't adapt. So let me ask everyone to reflect for a moment and think about which one of these three is your strongest link and which one is the weakest. Is it anticipating? Maybe you're not spotting early signals and trends. Is it adapting, shifting course when the environment changes? Or is it weak and acting, making timely, decisive moves before it's too late? So if you put your comments in chat about what your weakest and strongest links are, let's see where people fall. So a lot of people have mentioned, weakest being anticipate and adapt, strongest being act. Once we get to that point, let's see, weakest anticipate, strongest adapt, anticipate. So a lot of this, what I see in some of these comments, if we're not anticipating, it's very hard to adapt, to know what we're adapting to. So as we think about this, we're going to be looking at each one. And as we talk about some of the capabilities that need to be developed, you'll see how they help us better anticipate, adapt, and act. Now, here's the key. You don't need to know the future. You just need to be ready for it. And readiness isn't a one-time event. It's not like all of a sudden, oh, I'm ready. It's not a box to check. Becoming and staying ready is a discipline. It's something that leaders and boards must practice continuously. Now, one of the things here is, here's a truth, and that is what got us here will not get us to where we're going. The capabilities that made us successful, while helpful, are not always sufficient to go to the next level. Today's environment is full of tensions that leaders must navigate. Short-term versus long-term, risk versus innovation, experience versus learning. The mistake is thinking that these are either or choices. They're not, because if we choose one over the other in any of these, there's an adverse impact. But what we need is both and thinking. We need that short-term and long-term thinking together. We need risk and watching risk, but at the same time, we need to innovate. And that's why I want to introduce the 5 leadership superpowers. Think of them as a practical set of behaviors and mindsets that multiply value when they're applied together. And as we talk about these tensions, you'll notice each one of the superpowers takes that both sides of the tension and blends them together, because it is about that both and thinking. The first superpower is being a present futurist. A present futurist sees the present clearly. They know where stakeholders are coming from. They understand the context of the situation. They're scanning the horizon, and they're using signals to anticipate what's coming, to see where the trends are pointing us towards. And together that informs decisions. Second is being an experienced learner. An experienced learner balances past experience, some of which is relevant, and that's important to leverage. But at the same time, they know they need to learn. They're curious. They ask questions. They invite others into the discussion, and they foster continuous learning. Third is being a prepared risk taker. So it's recognizing that risk is a part of business, that whether you do something or don't do something, there's risk in not acting. Very often, which people equate with not being risky, is actually the riskiest of the options. And it's also about building resilience and placing smart bets. Think about prototyping and piloting, and you learn from those experiences before you make the bigger bets. Next is being a strategic executor, someone who links their vision, their strategy with execution. If you only have strategy and you can't execute, what you have is a dream, but that accomplishes nothing. If all you do is focus on execution and operations without strategy, you're very busy, but where are you heading? So it's about operationalizing that strategy. And fifth is about being an accountable collaborator. So if you think about most complex challenges, one department, one person cannot solve the problem. You need to work cross-functionally. You need to work with your ecosystem partners. You need to have a shared objective. What is it we're trying to accomplish? What outcome are we trying to achieve? And collaborate in a way that creates trust, alignment, and shared ownership. And you empower and enable the team to get the results. And in this case, accountability is accepted. Accountability comes with ownership versus accountability being a tool for blame. Now, the thing is, individually, each of these superpowers is powerful. But when the board and CIOs collectively bring all five to the table, blind spots shrink, agility rises, and value creation accelerates. These are proven capabilities of high-performing leaders, and they can be practiced, not just admired. So as we go forward, we're going to share a couple of cases of both successes where the superpowers drive and create value, and also some cases of what happens when you're not future ready, when the superpowers are not applied. So I want to talk first about discovery. So discovery, many of you know, with a large segment of our audience coming from Africa, from South Africa, is a South African financial services group that has built its success on a technology-driven shared value model. Their business strategy and technology are one and the same. That business strategy and technology strategy are inseparable. And when they launched their behavior-based insurance, which included using wearables, so integrating technology into the product to influence premiums and rewards, it was bold, but it worked because the board and the CIO applied the superpowers together. So let's look at how that happened. As present futurists, they spotted the convergence of health, insurance, and digital together and embedded wellness into their business model, into their product. As experienced learners, they tested behavioral economics. They learned from how the model was progressing, and they refined their algorithms to make sure it reflected the risks and the dynamics in the market. As prepared risk takers, they took their platform and said, we can license this globally. And through that licensing, which was a bet, they were able to scale. I think they're now in over 30 countries. And as strategic executors, they didn't talk about strategy and technology. They actually integrated them together and made them inseparable and linked this to how they govern the business. And as accountable collaborators, they're a perfect example of how the board, the CIO, and their partners congregated around that shared purpose. And the payoff was healthier customers, stronger partnerships, and above average shareholder returns. This is proof of what a future-ready partnership can deliver. So I want to go to our next case, and this really is where Vipin can come in and share his story, is the case of Toyota Financial Services. Vipin, take it away.
Thank you, Jay. So just to provide maybe a broader context, Toyota Financial Services is a wholly owned subsidiary of Toyota Motor Corporation, and we operated in 40 plus countries, including South Africa is one of them, among many. And so the primary business of Toyota Financial Services is to provide financing products to Toyota customers and dealers and partners. And this will include loans, lease, insurance, payments, various capabilities. So one of the largest auto finance company in the world, definitely in US. So I had joined Toyota in 2018. And at the time when I joined, just to give you the context, we had had a history of, especially around technology transformation, history of failures. In the sense, we have been trying to transform or modernize systems for about 8 years with no results. We had multiple CIOs and multiple consulting firms, etc. While that was happening, good news was the business continued to grow. It was a solid business, a great business model, but we were also anticipating that may not always stay the way it was. So there's a multiple factors playing in. So when I joined, I was really asked to come and fix IT. But within kind of first month or so, between the CEO, Mark, and I kind of started to realize there's a much bigger opportunity and as well as also a challenge to solve. So I stepped back at the time, and this is a little bit of a reflection of what I think Jay refers to as present futurist, which I absolutely love these superpowers and how Jay has really articulated them. And we stepped back and we said, really at the time in the industry, there were multiple forces in play. Automotive industry was moving into what is called the mobility. It's not just about building cars. It was about really moving people from point A to point B safely. And the second, so that didn't mean just a car. It could be a service. It could be some other way of mobility. It could be moving people from one room in the hospital to another room in the hospital. So the broader definition of mobility. The second piece, a second trend that was going on was the financial services industry was going through a massive digitization or digitalization with all the social, mobile, analytics, cloud, and all those elements that were playing in. A lot of fintechs were there, so we were competing with fintechs as well. So that transformation of financial services industry was going through. We were going through that. The third element was that if you look at the software industry, the technology industry was going through a significant transformation. And we were really moving from a lot of these companies, the software companies, were moving into a cloud-based company. For example, if you take an example of Adobe, you had to download the software or you had to buy the software on CDs, and they moved to the cloud. And that had created a massive growth for Adobe. So when they moved into a software as a services model. So these are three trends going on. And at that time, we anticipated that this is what the future will look like for us, where we will be a mobility company. We are going to digitally transform. We'll become a digital company. And plus, we will also turn ourselves into a software or as a service company, auto finance as a service company, where we will now offer Toyota Financial Services platform, operations, and everything, all the strength that we have, including even our treasury management strength, to other automakers so that they don't have to have their own financial services operation and the company. They can just private label it. So we'll, for example, Mazda Financial Services will operate as Mazda Financial Services, but underlying it's all Toyota Financial Services. So that was the idea. And we did that by 2020, March. So I joined 2018. 2020, March of 2020, right in the middle of COVID lockdowns that had started to happen, we launched our first private label business called Mazda Financial Services on Toyota platform. And it was absolutely a huge success for not only Mazda, but for Toyota. And then from there, a year later, we introduced one more company called Bass Pro. So they have financial services and so on and so forth. So you can see that we unlocked the company from being a captive finance company for just Toyota and Lexus to now being an auto finance company for other automakers and mobility providers. So now let's talk about how did we do that. So the future was established, we anticipated it, and we acted on it, and we were able to deliver. So along the way, we had to do a lot of things to adapt ourselves. If I can use, Jay, your 3 A's there. And I think the biggest competitive advantage for any company, any business, small or big, is their ability to change. Their ability to change quickly, their ability to change faster than the competitors. That's the biggest competitive advantage that one has. To do that, you need to change the underlying machine that drives change in your company. And in today's world, if you really think, digital is that machine that drives the change. And so what you see here on this page is all these elements where we said, present, futurist, that superpower was unlocked when we started to think about future. Experienced learner, this is my personal experience where when I came in, I was a rookie. All I have done financial services all my life. But then I was in an automotive financial services company. The automotive part was new, but it actually ended up really giving me the answer to unlocking the software engineering challenge that we were going through. So I learned this lean manufacturing and applied that to software engineering, and that changed the game for us completely, where we were able to build a completely new, everything from ground up for the company, all the systems to launch Martha Financial Services on a completely new, most modern technologies that were available to us. And we did this at a speed, as you can imagine, it was all done in about a year or so. We couldn't even upgrade one system over 8 years. And here we have 100 plus systems all built into one ecosystem and deployed in about a year or so. Prepared risk taker, this was really, really important. While we were building this new business model completely from ground up, all the way from accounting systems to everything that is needed to run the company, we did not want to impact our current business. It was a very well-growing business. Yes, it was on legacy systems, but otherwise it was growing very well. We had to protect that. We had to protect that ground. So by design, what we did was we took the risk by building this completely new platform or ecosystem and launched it with Mazda, and then moved the Toyota and Lexus business onto this platform. That way, we not only accomplished new business model, but we modernized the technology. And then we added the next line and so forth. Strategic executor, you just cannot, we had this very clear vision of what we are going to do. And we had to get there in step-by-step process, and that's what we did. So, and finally, accountable collaborator. You can't achieve something like this. The entire enterprise has to work. Everyone around the C-suite table have to be part of it. And one of the biggest elements, of which we can talk a lot about that, there were two elements that played into this. One was this idea that we created what we call as a decision inventory. Everything was focused on decisions, because I believed in the idea that when you make decisions, the tasks get done. So we didn't micromanage the task, we micromanaged the decisions. And the second idea was the fixed capacity. The idea that we will do this transformation, or while it will be done in 2 to 3 years, but for 5 years, we will maintain the same budget for IT. And the idea was we will reduce the waste in what happened in the organization and reinvest it. So it was self-funded from that perspective. So you could see that this was the kind of conversation really I had with board when I was starting this journey back into 2018. And think about, I'm talking about a Japanese company, as we all sometimes will say, large companies, they're slow to move. But this is the kind of decision we were able to influence in the board to make the decision and then to actually execute on that decision. So there are ways you can do that. And as a CIO, I really, really felt that my responsibility was to bring the entire context and the commercial context to them. And by the way, the success was significantly more than any one of us imagined. Our operating income grew, multiplied, not just grew. Our asset size grew in 3 years after doing this transformation.
Vipin, that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the things to note is that for every discovery in Toyota that gets it right, there are cautionary tales of what happens when boards and CIOs don't build a future-ready relationship. Now, Kodak is a perfect example of that, where this hubris, this confidence that, they were infallible, that nothing could hurt them. They dominated the film processing, and they had a global brand. Interestingly enough, they invented digital photography, but instead of seeing it as the future, they saw it as a threat. And if you look at each of the superpowers, they weren't present futurists because they failed to envision a digital future, even though they created it. They weren't experienced learners because they rejected learning from early signals of disruption. They didn't look into that more, explore it more, learn about it more. They weren't prepared risk takers. They didn't want to take risk. They avoided cannibalizing their film profits to embrace digital because they were afraid to take that risk. The problem is, if you don't take that risk, a competitor will, which is what happened. And they weren't accountable collaborators because the digital voices inside the company were sidelined. They didn't have partners in the board. And when that happened, over time, they lost customers, massive layoffs, employees lost their jobs. Rochester, where Kodak is headquartered, community declined, largest employer was gone, and ultimately filing Chapter 11. So that's an example of what happens when the leadership and the board cling to the past instead of preparing for the future. Another more recent example is Hertz. And in the case of Hertz, they were setting out to modernize digital booking. It was the right strategy on paper, but the execution collapsed. And if you think about the superpowers here, they failed on each one of the superpowers in some way. They didn't see that digital booking was mission critical to their future. That's how people are booking their travel arrangements. They ignored the red flags as they emerged. They weren't learning from what was happening in real time. They were not really good prepared risk takers. And this issue wasn't about not taking risk. It was about mismanaging it. They outsourced mission critical functions and didn't have the proper oversight. They failed to execute on their strategy. They spent over $30 million and did not get a functional product. And they weren't accountable collaborators because the CIO wasn't transparent. The board didn't ask the right questions. The vendors operated without oversight. So all these pieces were missing. And the results for any of us who happened to interact with Hertz during that time, the digital transformation failed. Customers were frustrated because they couldn't get served. They take that out on employees because they were frustrated. Employees were equally frustrated because they didn't have the tools to get the job done. And that lowered morale. And ultimately, given that this all happened during COVID when travel was already strained, it led in this case to them also declaring bankruptcy. So as you can see, there are positive stories. We've seen the upside of a future-ready partnership, and we've seen the risks when it fails. So let's bring this closer to home. I'm going to pass on this poll for the moment. But when you think about it, amongst, after the session, think about what risks most concern you. Is it that your board and CIO have a blind spot? Is there an execution gap? Is it about cybersecurity and resilience risks, which are important, but they're not the be all and end all? Is it about how the CIO and the board work together? Is it a trusting, collaborative relationship? Or is the risk about a failure to learn? So when you think about when this relationship is positive, you get better clarity and direction. The board and the executive team are aligned. They're on the same page, and that reduces barriers and misunderstanding. They see risks ahead, and they're not surprised. They see signals early so they can act. And they become a more agile and adaptable organization. So we've seen the risks and the rewards and the real world examples like Discovery, like Vipin story at Toyota. The question now is, how do you move from where you are today to capturing those gains? So let's shift from the why and the what to the how. What are practical steps the board and CIO can take to build a future-ready partnership? The first thing you can do is assess your board-CIO relationship. Clarity begins with the truth. Where are we today? Identifying where those gaps are. Holding dedicated sessions to help the board and CIO, so learning sessions to make space for the CIO and the board to learn together, to help educate each other and align around strategy. Learn and use shared frameworks like what we spoke about around future readiness and the superpowers. It helps to have a common language in which you can discuss these things and use common terms and common capabilities to talk about this. Extend the process beyond the CIO, because this process that we've walked through applies to CHROs, CFOs, chief marketing officers. It's about breaking silos and building collaboration. Vipin alluded to this when he talked about Toyota and working across functions. It's small, consistent actions like these that build the discipline of future readiness. Let's take it down just another level. How can you start preparing for tomorrow today? You can take our free Are You a Future Ready Leader self-assessment, and we'll be providing those links in the chat momentarily. You can request our new board-CIO relationship pulse check. We're going to be launching that next week, and if you're interested, email us for details. Third is a range of future-ready briefing, something similar to some of the content we shared today for your board, for your CIO, or both together. 4 is schedule a complimentary future readiness planning call. And I'm providing QR codes, which we'll share again in the mailing after the session for the self-assessment, for the discovery call, and also our contact information. The journey to future readiness starts with one move and then another. Think about, what can you do tomorrow? What discussions can you have? What can you do next week? And what can you do at your next board meeting to take action? So let's pause there. I want to open this up for questions, and I'll have some closing remarks at the end. So Carolyn, I suspect the audience has provided some questions. So please share those with us.
Absolutely. Let's have a look here, Jay. If you wouldn't mind stop sharing your presentation. Sure. Is there another poll you would like to run at any stage, or?
No.
Okay, great. All right. So let's have a look at the questions. Bill Nelson, let's start with you in the Q&A. I know that there were some in the chat. So if you have any questions in the chat that I'm missing in the Q&A, please pop them over into the Q&A. From Bill says technology as a core enterprise resource, agreed. Where the organization seeks to maximize technology, how should the board monitor the components to avert system failure when one component supplier implements an update that breaks the integration? It has to be unreasonable to expect the CIO to be 100% responsible when the board is accountable. And he's got a follow-on from that. If there is an identifiable problem moving up the maturity scale, presumably the answer is to drop a level and to look again. But let's just start with the first question. I guess, Vipin, that's for you. And then the second question really is to Jay.
Vipin?
Yeah, again, great question. Sorry, Jay, you were going to say something.
No, Vipin, it's all yours. Sorry for that.
Sorry. No, great question. So I think let's just step back and put this in a broader context. I think this is really, really important if you are a board member or if you're a CIO. We now live in an environment where everything is dependent on technology, but more importantly, even the technology in the enterprise is dependent on other suppliers. And those suppliers are dependent on other suppliers, and other suppliers, and other suppliers. So it's almost like a supply chain. Same challenge that automotive engineering, for example, has. So the difference here is if you talk to any automaker, they have a very clear understanding of the supply chain. They know that, they live with it, even the retail, even the food industry. But somehow in the digital engineering, because we are still learning, we don't have a very good understanding of what the supply chain is. The first layer, the second layer, the third layer, and so on and so forth. So as a board member, it becomes really, really important to do two things. One is to understand the external ecosystem, which is what are those dependencies, because that helps us define the accountability. Because then we know where the issue is and we can get to the accountability. The second, which is the internal ecosystem, there's an internal supply chain also. An enterprise is made up of departments and silos and responsibilities around those silos. So understanding what that overall machine looks like and who's responsible for what becomes really an important piece. And I think this is where, as a board member, I have found myself, and I found other board members also, a little bit where we don't have a full knowledge, so we become very transactional because we don't understand the machine. When we don't understand the entire machine and the interdependencies, it becomes very difficult to know where the issue is and who may have been responsible for making those decisions. So as a board member, one of the things that I try to do is really try to understand all the big pieces of the machine and who is accountable for what, and really try to also understand the interrelationship and the chemistry between the leaders. Because most of the fumble, as I call it, happens when the ball exchanges hands, right? At the interface points, at the integration points. I think that's the kind of point that you're making here. I'm not sure if I'm answering a question directly, but overall, I think that understanding of the internal ecosystem, external ecosystem, and interfacing points becomes really, really important. And I think we should all try to, as a CIO, I need to explain this to the board, explain in the sense, and as a board member, I need to be seeking to understand where those interface points are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Carolyn, you were talking about moving up the different levels. I think it's important you have that foundation and you build one layer atop of another. That if you're skipping layers, you don't have that stability. So before, as you progress, you still have to make sure the other things are being done. Does that answer the question? The other part of the question?
That's it. So moving up the maturity scale.
Yes. One thing builds on another, and you see how well these pieces are integrated. Do we have time for another question?
We've got another two. We'll make it quick. I'll stick with you, Jay, and then I'll ask the last one to Vipin. It's a comment from Damien. As McKinsey tells us, 69% of digital transformation projects fail. It's probably higher than that, but anyway, project management routines are still key, while still striving to have the 5 superpowers of leadership. Can you just do the integration for us around those two, the project management routines and the superpowers of leadership?
You froze on my end for a second, but
sorry. So if I can say that again, just integrating the project management routines with the 5 superpowers of leadership. How does the day-to-day management integrate with the 5 superpowers?
Vipin, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to take it?
I can take it, Jay.
Good.
This is our life, right? So this is as a practitioner, this is what we live. And I think everything that what Jay has mentioned is relevant. Let's start with one, present futurist, for example. This is really, really important because as a project manager, let's use the project manager as a role here, as a transformation manager, knowing the future, where we are going, the destination is important. So this is what typically happens. Most of the traditional project managers are going to start from the current, and they will take the steps and build a plan towards the future. So what I call as re-engineering the current state. What if you do it the other way around? Start from the destination and build your plan backwards, which is the reverse engineering towards the future. So that's just one element. I always keep an eye on the future rather than on the current, as to me is really important. Other one, which is really, really big for project managers, everyone does it, which is accountable collaborator. And that's the core of what we do every day. And I gave you the example of Toyota Financial Services. The way we did that, and every project manager in our team did that, we really gave them this idea, this tool, if you will, which was this tool called decision inventory, which is focus on decisions. And this is one thing, if I can really, one advice I can give you all is, think about it almost like this. In a manufacturing, when there's a flow, the biggest waste that is caused is because of inventory, right? The material that is either excess or less. In the management, the biggest waste is caused by decisions. If we could make the decision, we all know this, we all feel it, we all understand it, but we don't have a way to manage it. The way to manage is, what if each one of us, at the end of the day, measure our success on how many pending decisions I got resolved today? And you keep the inventory low. So as a project manager, that's the one way to hold everyone accountable to move the ball forward, is one example. And third, and we can talk about all five, but the third one, we can say experienced learner. This is one ability we don't talk enough about in the project managers, because somehow project managers or project management, where we are in that mode, we all have this idea that we know and we have the right resources, but this is where we have to create an environment where learning from each other becomes really, really important. And there's a whole topic, and I was asked to write about it, so I've written about it. I think it's going to get published. We introduced something called Digital Academy, but it was not really an academy. What we were trying to do was, we were asking each member of the team to know what their mastery is, and then asking them to teach that mastery to others. And we created the teaching culture. And when we create the teaching culture, learning culture happens. So again, from a project management, transformation management perspective, we cannot underestimate how much learning we have to all go through, not only the technical learning, but everything else that has to happen. And if you can create this teaching culture where each one is teaching each other, you just create the multiplying effect of learning, which then really helps from a project management perspective. And frankly, I just put my LinkedIn contact also. If you want to talk in details about these things, we can go. They're like each
Absolutely.
one is a one-off.
Thank you, Vipin. And we've run out of time. Jay, do you want to say a last comment?
Sure, please. So as we went through today, just to recap, we saw the board and CIO, there's an untapped potential. We see the value of providing a future-ready relationship, and we know it requires work on both sides. We've shared the superpowers, which gives you a framework for having those discussions, and we've provided steps that you can take. I think the most important thing is you need to act today, to act soon, because you'll quickly fall behind. So it's taking all that together. I know there are a lot of unanswered questions. I'm going to go back and look through the chat. Carolyn, I'll follow up with you, and we'll make sure we answer these questions in a follow-up communication that will go out to everybody. And I know, Carolyn, you have the slides, so we can provide those to the folks who registered who are in attendance. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vipin. Lovely to have you in a GGA webinar. Jay, wonderful to have you online again. It's really always very insightful every time you come and talk to us about those superpowers, and having Vipin here today talk about the application of that. It's just been fabulous. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us, and the recording will be available as well as summaries on the webpage. So please don't be strangers. Come and join another event soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.